Hey everyone, welcome to the show. It's funny when you think about it, but like, have you ever busted your butt on a project and it just goes totally unnoticed?
Oh, yeah.
Meanwhile, someone else who, let's be honest, didn't put in nearly as much effort or isn't even that good ends up with all the praise. Like, how does that even happen? It's like sometimes it feels like how good you look doing something matters more than how good you actually are.
I think that's something so many of us experience. We've all been there. And what's so interesting to me is the psychology behind it. Why does this happen? Well, our brains are wired for efficiency. They take shortcuts all the time. And it turns out judging someone's competence is actually really complex. So we tend to rely on signals and cues that might not actually reflect true ability.
Exactly. It's like we get fooled by the surface level stuff. And that's actually what we're going to be diving into today with this book called Convinced: How to Prove Your Competence and Win People Over by Jack Nasher. If you want to check it out, we'll have a link to it on Amazon down in the description below.
Great.
Yeah. And just to be super clear, this isn't about, becoming some kind of manipulative mastermind or pretending to be someone you're not.
Right.
That's not what we're about. What we are going to do is unpack Nasher's key insights so you can actually learn to showcase your real skills more effectively.
Yes.
And also get a clearer picture of like actual competence in other people.
Yeah.
It's about understanding, I guess, the psychology of perception.
Yeah, that's it. It's about genuine, authentic communication, but also understanding that perception is a big part of how we make judgments, especially in professional settings.
Totally. And what's fascinating is Nasher really makes this point that perceived competence can actually be a bigger driver of success than actual competence.
And that's a huge claim.
Right. It's like, whoa, hold on a sec.
Yeah.
Like, why is that?
He really dives into it in the book, but basically it boils down to this. The people around you, the people you're working with, your clients, even your bosses, often don't have the ability to fully assess your skills. They don't have the expertise to really judge your true competence.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So let's break this down. Nasher says that even our successes and failures might not change people's perceptions as much as we think. He uses this super interesting example, the Joshua Bell experiment. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, absolutely. This one is just mind-blowing. So picture this. One of the world's most talented violinists, Joshua Bell, is playing on a Stradivarius violin,
Oh, wow.
worth millions of dollars. He's playing incredibly complex, beautiful pieces of music. Where is he playing?
Carnegie Hall.
Nope.
No.
Subway station in New York City.
A subway station.
Yeah, you would think people would stop and be mesmerized, right?
Totally.
But guess what? Most people just rushed by, completely oblivious to this incredible display of musical talent.
Totally.
Only a handful of people, those with some musical background, recognized his genius. What does this tell us?
I mean, I guess it shows that talent alone isn't enough. Like, context is huge.
Yeah.
You could put that same violinist on a stage at Carnegie Hall, charge people $100 a ticket, and suddenly everyone's blown away. It just proves how much our expectations shape what we perceive and value. You could literally be standing right next to brilliance and not even realize it if the signals aren't there.
Absolutely. It's a powerful illustration of how easily we can miss true competence when it doesn't fit our preconceived notions of where and how it should appear.
And Nasher doesn't stop there. He also brings up this kind of epic corporate blunder. McKinsey & Company, a top consulting firm, made this massive prediction about the cell phone market back in the 80s.
This one's a classic. It really makes you think about the limits of expertise.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, McKinsey basically told AT&T that by the year 2000, there would only be about 1 million cell phone subscribers in the U.S. Totally wrong. In reality, by 2000, there were hundreds of millions of cell phone users.
Oh, wow. That's not just a slight miscalculation. That's a complete whiff.
Yeah, it was a huge strategic error, to say the least. But here's the really interesting part. McKinsey's reputation didn't suffer that much. They didn't lose all their clients or anything. Why do you think that is?
It's like we were saying before about perceived competence, right?
Yeah.
They had this long-standing reputation, this aura of expertise that kind of shielded them from the fallout of this massive failure. It makes you wonder how often that happens, where reputation overshadows actual performance.
It definitely raises questions about how much we can rely on past success as an indicator of future competence.
Right, just because someone was successful in the past doesn't mean they'll always be right. And Nasher takes this even further, back to a historical example, the practice of bloodletting.
This is a really striking example and a little bit unsettling when you think about it. For centuries, you had highly respected doctors, the leading medical minds of their time, routinely using bloodletting as a treatment for all sorts of ailments.
What, like draining people's blood?
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't just ineffective, it was often harmful. But despite this, their perceived competence remained high.
So why do you think that was? If their main treatment was actually making people sicker, why were they still so respected?
I guess it points to the power of authority and tradition. Back then, doctors were seen as these almost godlike figures. Their knowledge wasn't questioned.
Exactly. Plus, there's the whole placebo effect. Even if the treatment itself wasn't doing any good, the patient's belief in the doctor and the process might have led to some perceived improvement.
It's a reminder that sometimes what we believe is true can have a bigger impact than the actual truth. And makes you wonder, are there things that we do today, practices we accept without question, that future generations will look back on and think, wow, how could they have been so wrong?
It's definitely a thought-provoking question. And speaking of questioning assumptions, Nasher also brings in the work of Philip Tetlock, who did some groundbreaking research on expert predictions. Oh yeah, I've heard about that. He basically found that experts weren't that great at predicting the future.
Right. He did this long-term study across all sorts of fields, like politics, economics, you name it. And he found that being an expert, having all the credentials and experience, didn't actually make someone any better at predicting what would happen in the future. In some cases, a big reputation even seemed to hurt their accuracy.
That's crazy.
Oh.
You'd think the more knowledge and experience someone has, the better they'd be at predicting outcomes, but it's not always the case. So how do we explain this?
Well, Tetlock suggests it has to do with things like cognitive biases, our tendency to filter information through our existing beliefs. Experts, just like anyone else, can fall prey to these biases, which can distort their judgment. Plus, sometimes expertise leads to overconfidence, which can lead to bigger mistakes.
Right, so it's not that experts are inherently bad at predictions. It's more that we tend to overestimate their abilities and give too much weight to their opinions, even when those opinions might not be based on solid evidence. And all this idea of experts not always being right, the power of perception, it all ties back to what Nasher calls the assessment problem. Can you unpack that for us?
So, the assessment problem is basically the challenge of accurately evaluating someone else's competence, especially when we're outside of our own areas of expertise. Think about it. When you go to a doctor, how do you know if they're a good doctor? Unless you're a doctor yourself, you're probably not judging them on their actual medical knowledge. You're looking at things like, are they friendly? Is their office clean? Do they have fancy diplomas on the wall?
I never thought about it that way, but it's true. You're relying on these superficial cues because you don't have the knowledge to assess their actual medical skills.
Exactly. And it's the same in so many other areas of life. You might choose a car mechanic because they explain things in a way that made sense to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the best mechanic. You're relying on your perception of their communication skills as a proxy for their technical competence.
So if we're not that good at judging actual competence, what should we focus on? What does Nasher suggest?
This is where his first pillar comes in, the perception of brilliance. And it's all about managing expectations, or what he calls the anticipation effect. The basic idea is that you can influence how competent people perceive you to be by strategically shaping what they expect from you before you even start.
Okay, I like that. So it's not just about being competent. It's about setting the stage so people are ready to see you as competent. How do we do that? Give us some practical tips.
Nesher has a bunch of great examples in the book. One that stood out to me was the story of Miriam Lebo's first day at a new job. She walks in, and there's this young guy, dressed casually, just hanging out in the boss's office. She just assumes he's like an intern or something.
Yeah, you totally think that.
Turns out he's the president of the company, one of the founders.
Whoa.
That's how our initial expectations can totally shape our perceptions. Miriam had this image in her head of what a company president should look and act like, and this guy didn't fit the mold at all.
It's like that saying, don't judge a book by its cover, but we do it all the time, don't we?
We do, and those first impressions can be really hard to shake even when we get new information.
Another story that Nasher uses is about the IBM personal computer team. This was back in the days when the idea of a home computer was, like, totally radical. Most people thought it was ridiculous. Like, why would anyone need a computer at home?
Right. It was seen as a niche product for hobbyists at best. But this small team at IBM, they had this vision, this belief that personal computers were going to be huge, and they weren't afraid to go against the grain, to challenge the status quo.
So they were like the rebels of the tech world.
Kind of. And their confidence, their willingness to take a risk on this unconventional idea, that projected a sense of competence, even though they were going against the prevailing wisdom at the time.
It's like their belief in themselves was contagious.
Mm.
People started to think, well, if they think it's going to work, maybe they're onto something.
Exactly. And this ties into some really interesting research by Schlenker and Leary about the impact of predictions on perceived competence.
What did they find?
They found that people who made optimistic predictions about their performance were consistently rated as more competent, even when they didn't actually perform well.
Wait, seriously. So you could, like, totally bomb a task, but if you went in all confident saying you were going to nail it, people would still think you were more capable.
That's what the research suggests. It's like projecting that initial confidence creates this halo effect that makes people overlook actual results, at least to some extent.
Wow, that's kind of mind-blowing.
Right.
So what's the takeaway here? Should we all just go around making wildly optimistic predictions, even if we know we're not going to deliver?
Well, obviously there are limits. You don't want to be delusional or set unrealistic expectations. But within reason, going into a task with a positive outlook, projecting confidence in your abilities, can definitely influence how people perceive you.
Interesting. So it's not just about being competent, it's about setting the stage for competence.
Yeah.
And Nasher talks about this thing called the fear of imminent deterioration.
Yes. This is a powerful psychological driver. It basically means that people are often more motivated by avoiding negative outcomes than by achieving positive ones. They're more focused on preventing bad things from happening than on making great things happen.
So it's like playing it safe, sticking with what you know, even if it's not the best option.
Exactly. Think about hiring decisions. Someone who's hiring might choose a candidate with a solid but unspectacular track record over someone who's potentially brilliant but also more of a wild card.
Because they're worried about the risk, the potential downside.
Right. It's like they're thinking, this person might not be amazing, but at least they're not going to rock the boat or cause any problems.
And there's that great quote by Harry Beckwith, "Do not try to be a good choice. Eliminate everything that could make you a bad choice."
I love that quote. It perfectly captures this idea of focusing on minimizing risk, alleviating the fears of the people who are evaluating you. It's about making them feel confident that you're not going to screw things up.
Which, I guess, ultimately leads to them perceiving you as more competent.
That's the idea. And then we have this thing called confirmation bias, which plays a huge role in how we perceive competence.
Confirmation bias. Remind us what that is again?
It's basically this tendency we have to interpret information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. We look for evidence that supports what we already think, and we tend to ignore or downplay evidence that contradicts it.
So if we think someone is competent, we'll notice all the things they do well, and we'll kind of gloss over any mistakes they make. And if we think someone is incompetent, we'll do the opposite.
Exactly. Nasher uses this experiment with a woman named Jane to illustrate this. People were given the same description of Jane's life, but some were told she was shy, and others were told she was extroverted. And guess what?
They interpreted her actions differently depending on what they were told about her personality.
Exactly. The people who thought she was shy saw all her actions as evidence of her shyness, and the people who thought she was extroverted saw the same actions as signs of her outgoing nature.
So even when we're given the same information, our existing beliefs about someone can totally color our perception of them.
It's like we're wearing these filters that shape how we see the world, and those filters are influenced by our past experiences, our biases, and our expectations.
So how do we overcome this? How do we make sure people see us for who we really are, not just through the lens of their own biases?
It's a tough one, but Nasher has some good strategies. One thing he suggests is focusing on building genuine relationships. The better people know you, the less likely they are to rely on superficial cues and stereotypes. He also talks about the importance of understanding and addressing your own biases, because that can help you present yourself in a more authentic and unbiased way.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And one thing I found really interesting is that Nasher doesn't just talk about external strategies, he also dives into the idea of cultivating confidence from within.
Yes, and this part is really empowering because it suggests that we have more control over our own confidence than we might think. He starts by talking about the bridge experiment, which is a classic study in psychology.
I've heard about that one. Something about a scary bridge, right?
Yeah, so in this experiment, researchers had people cross a high, wobbly bridge, and then they had them meet an interviewer on the other side. And what they found was that the people who crossed the scary bridge were more likely to feel attracted to the interviewer.
Really? Why is that?
Because their heart rate was elevated from crossing the bridge, and they misattributed that physiological arousal to attraction.
So their body was reacting to the fear, but their mind was interpreting it as romantic interest.
Exactly. And this shows us that our physical state can actually influence our emotions.
Interesting. So if we can trick our bodies into feeling more confident, maybe our minds will follow suit.
That's the idea. And Nasher points to another study, this one by Frick Strack, where he had people hold a pen in their mouth in a way that forced them to smile.
Okay, I've heard of this one.
Right.
And it actually made them feel happier, right?
Exactly. Just the act of smiling, even if it was forced, had a positive impact on their mood. And this suggests that there's this link between our facial expressions, our body language, and our internal emotional state.
So if we want to feel more confident, maybe we should start smiling more.
It's worth a try. And then there's this superhero stance study, which is a personal favorite of mine.
Oh, yeah, I love that one. Stand like Superman and you'll feel like Superman.
Basically. In this study, they had people hold different poses, some high-power poses, like standing tall with your chest out, and others low-power poses, like slouching or making yourself small. And they found that holding the high-power poses for just a few minutes actually changed their hormone levels.
Wow, really?
Yeah, their cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone, went down, and their testosterone levels, which is associated with confidence and dominance, went up.
So just by changing your posture, you can actually change your body chemistry. That's
It
crazy.
is. And there's even evidence that these hormonal changes can have a lasting impact on your behavior, making you more likely to take risks and assert yourself. Jordan Peterson, in his book 12 Rules for Life, talks about this too, about how standing up straight and adopting a confident posture can have this positive feedback loop with your feelings of competence and self-efficacy.
So it's not just about faking it till you make it. It's about using your body to actually change how you feel. I like that. And then Nasher brings in this idea of priming, which is basically mental preparation for success.
Right. Think of athletes visualizing themselves performing well before a big game. David Platt, the soccer player, he used to watch videos of his best goals before every match to get himself in the right mindset. Serena Williams focuses on her strengths before a serve.
It's like they're mentally rehearsing success.
Exactly. And it can have a huge impact. Sally Gunnell, the Olympic hurdler, she said, it's the difference between gold and silver.
Wow, that's powerful. So if we want to boost our confidence and perform at our best, we should take some time to visualize ourselves succeeding, focus on our strengths, and kind of push away any doubts.
Absolutely. And it's not just about big events. You can use priming before any important task, whether it's a presentation, a job interview, or even just a difficult conversation.
Makes sense. But Nasher also cautions against excessive modesty. He tells this story about a surgeon who downplays his abilities to a patient who's just broken his leg.
Right. And the point is, while humility is a virtue in many contexts, when people are relying on your expertise, they need to feel confident that you can handle the situation.
Like, you don't want your surgeon saying, well, I've never done this type of surgery before, but I'll give it a shot.
Exactly. In those situations, excessive modesty can actually backfire and make people doubt your competence.
It's like, if you don't believe in yourself, why should anyone else?
Right. But Nasher does point out that a slight negative remark, strategically placed, can actually increase your credibility.
Really? How does that work?
He uses this experiment with two guys, Dave and John, who are applying for a job. The people reading their applications were given the same positive information about both candidates, but for John, they also added a small negative comment, like he's not always the most organized person.
Okay, and what happened?
John actually got more interview requests.
Interesting. So it's like admitting a small flaw made him seem more human, more relatable, and ultimately more trustworthy.
Exactly. It's like the imperfection made the positive aspects seem more believable, more genuine.
Okay, that's a good tip. But overall, the message is clear. Confidence matters. And Nasher even contrasts those typically cited civic figures with those who projected strong confidence, like Napoleon, Beethoven, even Donald Trump.
And it's interesting to think about those figures who exuded confidence. They tend to be the ones who really make a mark on the world. George Clooney even said that he got ahead in Hollywood by selling confidence, not even my acting skills. He used a football analogy. If you stand at the plate like you've never hit a home run, the pitcher's going to think, I can strike this guy out.
Love that analogy. So confidence is like that swagger that makes people believe in you, even if they don't have all the evidence yet. And we see this not just with individuals, but with companies too. Think about luxury brands. They spend a fortune on these opulent flagship stores and elaborate fashion shows.
Yeah, and it's all about creating an aura of exclusivity and success. Those high-end experiences influence our perception of the entire brand, even the more affordable products.
It's like they're saying, if we can create these amazing over-the-top experiences, imagine how great our everyday products must be.
Exactly. And when it comes to delivering news, especially good news, your physical presentation matters. Nasher emphasizes the importance of good lighting.
Why is lighting so important?
Well, studies have shown that bright lighting not only helps people remember information better, but it also conveys a sense of importance and leadership.
So if you're announcing a big success, make sure the room is well lit.
Absolutely. It helps create that positive association with the news you're delivering. And on the flip side, when delivering bad news, the strategy is often to be less visible, to delegate if possible.
It's like trying to distance yourself from the negative news. Nasher mentions the example of Sir Phil Watts, the CEO of Shell, after they had that huge oil reserves miscalculation.
Yeah, basically, he kind of disappeared from public view for a while. And Nasher also talks about the anger rule for delivering bad news, which is interesting because it's not as simple as it sounds.
Fill us in.
Well, the rule suggests that men of high status can sometimes get away with expressing anger when delivering bad news. It might even make them seem more powerful.
But obviously that's not true for everyone.
Right. For people of lower status, like trainees, and for women in general, expressing anger is usually not effective and can even backfire. And no matter who you are, expressions of grief, shame, or guilt are almost always counterproductive.
So it's all about choosing the right emotional response for the situation, which is tricky. But one thing that seems clear is that no matter how bad the news is, you always want to end on a positive note.
Absolutely. Nasher emphasizes the importance of quickly shifting to optimism, focusing on what can be learned from the situation and the positive steps that will be taken going forward. He gives some good examples, like GM after that whole ashtray incident and JetBlue's response to those flight delays.
Right, so it's like acknowledge the problem, but then quickly pivot to solutions and a positive outlook. It's all about controlling the narrative.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second pillar, the power of association. This is all about how the order in which you present information, especially good and bad news, can have a huge impact on how it's received.
Okay, so we're talking about timing and sequence. Is there a right way to do this?
Nasher says most people get this wrong. He brings in this classic research by Solomon Asch, who demonstrated the power of what's called the primacy effect.
Primacy effect, that rings a bell.
It basically means that the first information we receive about someone has a disproportionate impact on our overall impression of them. Ash did this experiment where he presented the same set of adjectives describing a person, but in different orders, and guess what?
People had totally different opinions of the person depending on which adjectives they heard first.
Exactly. The first impression acted like a filter, coloring how they interpreted all the subsequent information. It's like that old saying, you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
That's true. And Nasher connects this to sales, specifically the tactic of lowballing.
Right. So with lowballing, a salesperson starts by offering a really attractive price, something that seems like a great deal. Then, once the customer is hooked, they start adding on extra fees or revealing hidden costs.
It's kind of sneaky, but it's effective because that initial positive impression makes the overall deal seem more acceptable, even with the added expenses.
Exactly. It's a classic example of the primacy effect in action. And the opposite is also true. If you start by highlighting all the negatives, people are less likely to be receptive to the positives that come later.
So if you're trying to make an argument or sell an idea, always lead with your strongest point. Makes sense. But what about the information that comes last? Does that matter too?
It does. There's also something called the recency effect, which means that the last information we hear is also highly memorable.
Okay, so we have the primacy effect, the first impression, and the recency effect, the last impression. So what's the best strategy for combining these two?
Nasher suggests this. Lead with your strongest positive point, primacy effect, then address any negatives or weaker points, and then finish with another strong positive point, recency effect. This way, you start and end on a high note, creating both a strong first impression and a lasting positive memory.
Start strong, address the weaknesses, and finish strong. Got it.
Yeah.
And all this ties back to the halo effect, right?
Absolutely. When you're associated with good news, especially when you present it prominently, the halo effect enhances the positive perception. Conversely, when bad news is unavoidable, trying to minimize your visibility, like we talked about earlier, can help reduce the negative association.
So if you have to deliver bad news, try to delegate it or do it in a way that doesn't put you in the spotlight.
Right. But if you must be the one to deliver it, the key is to admit mistakes quickly and then immediately shift to positive lessons and future improvements. Don't dwell on the negative.
Control the narrative. Focus on the solutions. So through understanding these principles, how our perceptions work, how we make judgments about competence, we can actually have a lot more control over how we're seen by others.
That's the power of this stuff. It's not about being fake or manipulative. It's about understanding the psychology of perception and using it to showcase your true abilities in the most effective way.
So for our listeners out there, think about what we've talked about today. Which of these ideas resonated with you the most? How might you apply these insights in your own life, in your work, in your relationships?
And if you want to learn more about this stuff, definitely check out Convinced by Jack Nasher. It's a great read full of practical strategies for proving your competence and winning people over.
We'll have a link to the book down in the description. And one final thought for you to ponder. Now that you know how easily perceived competence can be influenced, how does that change the way you evaluate the competence of others? Are you more aware of the cues you might be unconsciously relying on? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.